She smiled. That's the part one remember most, even now. Not the crack of my wrist against the marble, not the white flash of pain above my eye, not even the sound of glass shattering somewhere far below me as the tray left my hands. What I remember is her face at the bottom of the staircase, calm and composed, watching me fall like she was watching rain hit a window. My mother-in-law did not gasp. She did not reach for me. She smiled, small and quick, gone before anyone else in that crowded dining room could have possibly noticed it. But I noticed. And that same night, while I lay in a hospital bed with stitches pulling at my skin and a nurse gently holding my uninjured hand, my husband was home in our bed with another woman when a doctor's call lit up his phone. Your wife was pregnant, the doctor told him. She lost the pregnancy. Future pregnancies are now very unlikely. My husband did not come to the hospital that night. Not that night, and not the next morning either. His mother sent a gift basket instead, with a card that read, "Walk more carefully next time." What none of them understood, not my husband, not his mother, not one single person sitting at that gleaming dinner table, was that I had already stopped being the girl they believed they owned. My name is Oti Vance, and for 3 years I lived inside a house that was never mine, married to a man who never once looked at me the way he looked at his phone. I met Holden Ferris the year after my father died, when I was 24 and still raw with grief, still tired of coming home to a house that echoed with nobody in it. Holden owned a growing construction firm in Charleston, the kind of business that made his mother's friends whisper about old money, even though the fortune behind it was only 2 generations deep and mostly borrowed against reputation. He had the kind of charm that rich men learn early in life, the kind that opens doors before you've even finished asking a question, and closes them again just as easily the moment you stop being useful. Our courtship moved fast, dinners at restaurants where the menu carried no prices, long drives along the coast while he talked about the empire he intended to build. I listened, and I mistook his ambition for depth, the way grief sometimes makes you generous with your judgment. I never told him about my father's estate, not because I had anything shameful to hide, but because my father had taught me one rule before he passed. Never let people love your money before they love you. So I let Holden believe I came from very little. I let his mother, Vesta Holbrook, believe the very same thing. Vesta never liked me, not for a single day, not even during our engagement, when politeness usually forces at least a performance of warmth. From the very first dinner at the Ferris estate, she looked at my thrift blazer the way you might look at a stain on a white tablecloth, something to be quietly removed before the guests noticed. She's sweet, I heard her tell Holden in the kitchen that night, not bothering to lower her voice enough for the hallway to miss it. But sweet doesn't last very long in a family like ours. I told myself she would warm up eventually. She never did. She only grew more precise in her coldness, the way certain people do when they sense that kindness will never be repaid with obedience. And I stayed anyway, because I still believed, foolishly, that patience was a kind of strength. What I didn't yet understand was how much that house was already keeping from me, and how much I was keeping from it in return. For 3 years I lived in the east wing of the Ferris mansion, in rooms Vesta still called the guest quarters long after I had legally become Holden's wife. I wore the same 3 dresses to every family gathering because Holden controlled every account in that household, and Vesta made certain the budget never quite stretched far enough to include me. I sat at that dinner table twice a week while my opinions were treated as decoration, while Vesta directed every question to Holden even when it was plainly meant for me, as though I were a piece of furniture that occasionally required translation. What none of them knew, what I made absolutely certain none of them would ever discover, was that my father, Elias Vance, had built something far larger and far quieter than anyone in that mansion ever suspected. He had started with a modest freight company on the Georgia coast in his 20s, and by the time he passed, he had grown it into a logistics enterprise worth more than Holden's entire construction business combined, every property, every contract, every loan included. Before he died, my father had restructured the whole company into a private family trust, ring-fenced by 3 separate law firms, untouchable by marriage or divorce or any claim that didn't carry my own signature. $80 million sat quietly under my name, invisible to a household that measured my worth by the label stitched inside my shoes. My attorney, Creasa Marlowe, had managed that estate since I was 22, long before Holden ever entered my life, and she was never shy about what she saw happening to me. You are letting them treat you like you are powerless, she told me once over coffee, nearly a year before everything broke apart. People like that do not change because you are patient with them. They change the moment the truth stops being convenient to ignore. I smiled at her the way you smile at someone who is right but inconvenient to agree with, and I told her I could handle it. I had no idea how soon I would need every word she had just given me. There is one dinner from that year I still remember in exact detail, the kind of memory that stays sharp long after softer ones fade. It was Holden's birthday, and Vesta had invited nearly 40 guests to the estate, each one dressed in something that cost more than my entire monthly allowance. I had spent weeks quietly saving grocery money to buy Holden a watch I knew he wanted, wrapping it myself since Vesta always hired someone for that. At the table, in front of every guest, Vesta lifted her glass and toasted her son, who has always known how to build something from nothing, she said, even when the people around him occasionally forget their place. She smiled at me as she said it, a practiced, elegant smile that made the insult land exactly where she intended, dressed up as a toast so no one at the table would recognize it for what it was. Holden laughed along with everyone else. He didn't correct her. He never did. I smiled too, because that was the only currency I had left in that house, the ability to absorb an insult gracefully enough that no one else noticed it had happened. I told myself, driving home in silence that night, that one day the smiling would stop being necessary. I had no idea just how soon that day was coming, or how much it would cost me to reach it. 6 weeks before the accident, I found out I was pregnant. I had suspected for 2 weeks before I let myself confirm it, counting the days in a small notebook I kept hidden in my nightstand, the same notebook where I recorded every slight from Vesta, every late night Holden came home smelling like someone else's perfume. When the test finally confirmed it, I sat on the bathroom floor and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself since my father's funeral. I hadn't told Holden. I hadn't told Vesta. In a house where nothing had ever fully belonged to me, I wanted to hold this one secret a little longer, to let it exist just for me before it became something the Ferris family could comment on or criticize or claim ownership of. Holden had been distant for months by then, longer than I wanted to admit to myself, always some version of the same excuse, a client dinner, a site inspection running late, an overseas call with an investor. I noticed the perfume on his collar before I noticed anything else, floral and expensive and never once matching anything I owned. I said nothing, because saying something in that house never changed anything. It only handed Vesta a new detail to sharpen against me at the next dinner. I eventually learned her name. Bryn Castelliano, 26, a marketing coordinator at Holden's company, always the loudest laugh in every holiday photo Vesta displayed along the mantle like trophies of a family that photographed well even when it functioned poorly. 3 days before the fall, I glimpsed a message light up on Holden's tablet while he showered, and I didn't need to read the words. The tone told me everything, familiar, affectionate, the unmistakable rhythm of two people who had long since stopped hiding things from each other. I didn't confront him. Confrontation had never once worked in that house. It only gave Vesta an audience for my supposed hysteria. Instead, I made an appointment with Creaser the following morning. If you ever decide to leave, she told me, sliding a folder across her desk, everything is already in place. The trust has never been touched. You could walk out of that house tomorrow morning and Holden Ferris would never trace a single dollar back to you. I told her I wasn't ready yet, that I wanted to give my marriage one more season, that maybe the baby growing quietly inside me would change something in him that 3 years of marriage hadn't managed to. I did not know, sitting in that office with my hand resting over my stomach, that I was about to lose far more than a season. It was a Sunday evening when Vesta hosted one of her formal dinners, the kind of event where the placement of the silverware mattered more than anything spoken across the table. I came down the east staircase carrying a tray of appetizers, because in that house, wives fetched and mothers presided. Vesta stood at the bottom in a deep burgundy gown, watching me descend in the same navy dress she had already criticized twice that week for being, in her words, a little too plain for company. My foot caught the edge of the runner rug near the top step. I remember the tray leaving my hands before my body did, the small popping sounds of glass hitting marble somewhere far below. I remember reaching for the railing and missing it by less than an inch. And I remember, in the half-second suspended between falling and landing, looking down and catching Vesta's expression at the bottom of the stairs. She did not gasp. She did not move toward me. She smiled, small and quick, gone before anyone else in the room could have possibly noticed it. But I caught it, and it stayed lodged in me longer than the pain of the impact ever did. Then everything went black, and the world I had known simply stopped. I woke under fluorescent hospital lights, my head pounding in slow deliberate waves, stitches pulling at torn skin above my eyebrow. A doctor stood over me with the careful rehearsed calm of a man who had delivered difficult news more times than he could count. "You took a serious fall down a full staircase," he said gently. "You have a concussion, 2 fractured ribs, and a fractured wrist, but you're stable and you're going to recover." My hand moved to my stomach before my mind had caught up to the fear underneath it. "The baby," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. His face told me the answer before his words arrived. "You were 8 weeks along," he said quietly, sitting beside my bed rather than looming over it. "I'm very sorry. The fall caused a miscarriage." There aren't adequate words for what that silence felt like afterward. A nurse named Priya sat with me for nearly an hour that first night, long after her shift technically ended, simply because she noticed no one else had come. She didn't say much. She just held my uninjured hand and let me cry without trying to fix anything, which was somehow more comforting than every careful word the doctor had offered. Holden didn't come, not that night when a nurse finally reached him by phone, and not the next morning when I woke alone with nothing but a half-empty water pitcher for company. What I later pieced together, through the doctor's own account and through Holden's careless confession weeks afterward, was that the doctor had called Holden directly that same evening to walk him through everything, the concussion, the fractures, and something far more permanent. The fall had left scarring that would make future pregnancies extremely unlikely. Holden was in our bedroom when that call came through. He was not alone. "Your wife was pregnant," the doctor told him plainly. "She lost the pregnancy." "I'm very sorry, Mr. Ferris." I didn't feel anything when he said it, Holden admitted to me weeks later, not even looking ashamed. I just wanted him to hang up so Bryn and I could keep talking. That same night, from my hospital bed, I sent him one final message. "Enjoy the family you chose." Then I turned my phone off completely and didn't turn it back on for 6 days. Vesta didn't call. She didn't visit. Instead, 2 days after the miscarriage, a delivery arrived at my hospital room, a large elaborate arrangement of white lilies, the kind more commonly reserved for funerals than for a recovering daughter-in-law. The card read, "Accident happen. Try not to be so dramatic about it." I read that card 3 times before I let myself feel the full weight of it. For 3 years I had excused Vesta's coldness as old-fashioned strictness. I had excused Holden's distance as the stress of a growing business. Lying in that hospital bed, my body feeling empty in a way no amount of time would ever fully repair, I finally understood something I had spent 3 years refusing to accept. They had not been hiding who they were. I had simply been refusing to see it clearly. That was the day my grief turned into something colder, sharper, and far more useful than sorrow had ever been, and nothing that happened after would look anything like what came before. I called Creaser the morning I was discharged, still wearing the same navy dress I had fallen in. "I'm ready," I told her, standing in the parking lot with my discharge papers tucked under my uninjured arm. "Ready for which part?" she asked evenly. "Leaving, or the rest of it?" "All of it," I said. What she revealed to me that afternoon was something she had quietly arranged over the previous year, using authority I had granted her long ago over certain trust investments. 18 months earlier, a former business partner of Holden's had left Ferris Construction bitterly after a profit dispute Holden handled with startling arrogance. That partner, a quiet man named Garrison Whitfield, sold his minority stake to the first serious buyer who approached him through a shell entity Creaser had quietly arranged. I owned 12% of my husband's company, legally and silently, for over a year, without Holden or Vesta ever suspecting who stood behind the paperwork. Holden had spent that same year expanding aggressively, leveraging his name and his mother's reputation as collateral, assuming charm and lineage would always be enough. What he never accounted for was a minority shareholder with access to one of the sharpest corporate attorneys in the state, and a motive he had personally handed her the night he chose silence over his own wife's hospital bed. I didn't go home to Ashgrove Lane. I checked into a hotel across town, and from that small anonymous room, Creaser and I began quietly building the case that would end the Ferris family's control over everything they valued most, not through anger or confrontation, but through paperwork, patience, and precision, the very qualities they had spent 3 years mistaking for weakness in me. The divorce papers were the easy part. Holden signed them almost immediately, relieved to finalize things and move on toward whatever future he imagined with Bryn beside him. He didn't know that signing those papers activated a clause Creaser had built into our prenuptial agreement years earlier, one he had signed without reading closely, reassured by his mother that it was merely a formality. The clause specified that any proven breach of fidelity during the marriage would entitle me to a settlement calculated from the assessed value of Ferris construction itself. Creaser had already gathered everything required to prove it, hotel receipts spanning nearly a year, messages Bryn had carelessly left on a company device, testimony from employees relieved to finally speak once they understood they wouldn't face consequences for it. Within 4 months, combined with other shareholders who had lost confidence in Holden's leadership, my ownership stake and the settlement gave the board enough support to force a full restructuring. Holden remained listed on paper as a founder, a title carrying no real authority behind it anymore. Vesta lost the one thing she had always valued above even her son's happiness: status. The mansion had been quietly mortgaged against company assets during Holden's expansion, and when the finances restructured, the debts followed. Vesta and Holden moved into a smaller house on the other side of Charleston, noticeably less grand than the guest quarters I had once been assigned to live in. The morning of the board vote, I sat in a conference room I had never once been invited into as Holden's wife, at a table where every seat had once belonged to men who barely acknowledged my presence at family dinners. Holden arrived 10 minutes late, his tie slightly crooked, clearly unprepared for the version of me sitting across from him. He looked at the shareholder documents for a long moment before understanding what he was actually seeing. 12%, he said quietly, reading my name printed beside the ownership figure. You've had this the entire time. Since before the wedding anniversary, I said without raising my voice. You forgot 2 years in a row. You were never observant about the things that actually mattered. The vote took less than 20 minutes. 3 board members, frustrated with Holden's reckless borrowing, sided with the restructuring plan Creaser had proposed months earlier. His mother's name carried weight in ballrooms and at dinner parties, but it carried nothing at all in a room built around balance sheets and liability. I saw Holden once more, months later, in Creaser's office for the final signing. He looked older, thinner, the charm I had once mistaken for depth now looking more like plain exhaustion. He asked me quietly why I had never told him about the trust, about my father's company, about any of it. Because you never once asked who I actually was, I told him, sliding the last signed page back across the table. You only ever asked what I could give you. Money would have simply given you a better answer to the same question. Vesta wasn't in the room that day. I heard afterward that she had tried twice to arrange a private meeting with me, not to apologize, but to ask whether some portion of the settlement might be softened for the sake of family. Creaser declined the request without needing to consult me first. She already knew what my answer would have been. Vesta did manage to reach me once, unexpectedly, in the parking lot outside Creaser's office. She looked smaller than I remembered, her usual composure replaced by something brittle. You always were quiet, she said, arms crossed against the wind. I never realized quiet could mean calculating. It didn't mean calculating, I told her. It meant waiting for a reason to stop being patient with you. You gave me one. She didn't have anything to say to that. I got into my car and didn't look back, though I suspect if I had, she would have still been standing there. As far as I know, Bryn and Holden are still together, and I find myself hoping, quietly, that she eventually asks him the same question he never once thought to ask me. I used part of my father's trust, together with the settlement from the restructuring, to open a small logistics consultancy of my own, something entirely separate from anything the Ferris name had ever touched. I named it after my father. Within a year, it employed 11 people, none of whom had ever known a version of me who apologized for taking up space at a dinner table. I moved into a small house near the coast, nothing like the mansion on Ashgrove Lane, no cold marble, no curated photographs along a mantel, just creaky floors and a garden I'm slowly learning to keep alive. For the first time in years, every room in it actually belongs to me. I don't think about the staircase often anymore, but when I do, it isn't the fall itself that comes back to me first. It's the smile. It taught me something no amount of comfort ever could have. Some people will only ever recognize your worth in the exact moment they realize they have lost the ability to take it from you. I still think, some quiet mornings on my porch with coffee, about the child I lost that night, the one whose existence became a footnote in someone else's betrayal before it ever had the chance to become a joy in mine. That grief never fully closes. I have simply learned, slowly, how to carry it without letting it define everything else I choose to build. Vesta once told me that sweetness doesn't last very long in a family like theirs. She was right. It didn't. But I did. And if someone smiled while you were falling and called it an accident afterward, I wonder, how long would you have waited before you stopped believing them?